Facing backlash from both Democrats and Republicans. This comes as the Justice Department is facing a big test now as it launches a civil rights investigation into the Charlottesville attack. Joining us now to discuss the situation, break it down a little bit, lawyer and civil rights expert Frederick, a visiting professor in law and public policy at Georgetown University, a former U.S. attorney, and chief of the Civil Rights Section of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Also, author of the book called Punishing Hate, which came out a while ago but has been updated throughout the years. And to add to that, former dean of the law school at George Washington University here in D.C., very impressive resume. Let's talk right now about what we saw in Charlottesville this weekend, what the Justice Department now has on its plate. Where does the Justice Department go from here?
Justice Department does an investigation not just for the underlying violence, but whether the intent was to violate the civil rights of the victims, which is to say, were these things done because of the race or ethnicity or gender of the victims? Were they done to interfere with constitutional rights? So if, for example, you have protesters who are exercising their free expression rights and there's criminal activity to interfere with that, that becomes a constitutional crime, a civil rights crime. That brings the federal government in.
So let's take a couple different perspectives here, okay? Let's say what happened in Charlottesville right now, even the president saying yesterday there's activity on both sides here. What does that do as far as the legal standing of the case then?
You know, there are two different things going on. On the legal side, we would all do well to get it out of the newspapers, out of the headlines, let the Department of Justice, and for that matter, the Attorney General of Virginia, investigate, charge crimes, and prosecute. Then there's the public piece of this, where it really is incumbent upon all of us, from political leaders on down, to look for common ground and to begin to calm the waters. Because we need social healing at the same time as we need criminal prosecutions.
What does it take for, in the eyes of the law, for it to be considered the hate crime? Now, in this case, I understand that people were hurt and a woman lost her life here. If we remove any physical injury from it, can it still be a hate crime, though, from what we saw in Charlottesville, anything that occurred there?
Well, if you take all of the violence out, then no, then it's not a crime. But what makes a hate crime different, it's a criminal manifestation of bigotry. So it's not just that there's a crime. It's not just there's an assault or arson or vandalism or, in this case, homicide, but it's done with bias motivation. That's what makes it a hate crime. And it makes it a hate crime for a very particular reason. It hurts not only the individual victim, of course, but the entire target community. You know, when you have cases, for example, of hate crimes targeted against African Americans, it's not just the individual victim who's hurt, but the African American community in that area perceives themselves as victims. And in fact, sometimes nationwide, we observe symptomology of victimhood on behalf of all members of the group, a sense of separation of society, a sense of attack. And then finally, with a hate crime, you hit what I call a social fissure line, where society splits in a particularly dangerous way. That's why you and I are sitting here talking about this.
We've already seen civil action being taken in regards to what happened over the weekend. From a criminal standpoint, how far can it go? Can a leader of the rally be charged with a crime? Is it simply, in this case, would it be the driver of that vehicle that drove into the crowd, or can it be other people who organized the event that could be drawn into this from a criminal standpoint?
The whole thing turns on the intent of the actor. So if the organizers were complicit in the crime, then they could be. If the organizers organize an event which is constitutionally protected speech, and then someone at that event behaves in a criminal way, then no, they're not criminally responsible.
It's been some time since your book first was published. I know it's been updated throughout the
Correct.
years. What have you seen in the last couple of decades now as far as the attitude, the amount of hate groups out there, the prevalence, or just the openness of hate groups being out there in society?
Well, the truth is, over the past couple of decades, we've seen two different trends. We have seen improvement in the sense of a much greater awareness by law enforcement, by the public, that these crimes are different. Police taking them much more seriously and understanding what they are as different kinds of crimes. So I would call that a positive development. Now, in the last couple of years, and particularly, I have to say, in the last months, we have seen much more prominent public presentation of this kind of hate-directed activity. So I think it's too soon to call this a trend, but it bears very, very close watching. And I think you see the whole country focused on this for a reason.
For those who are involved or members of the hate organizations, when they see all of this played out over and over again, does that empower them?
Absolutely. Absolutely, which is why you see right now discussion about similar events on college campuses this fall. You know, I'm a former university president, and now as the CEO of the Phi Beta Kappa Society, we have almost 300 chapters all across the country. So this is the world I live in and focus on. every college president, I assure you right now, is concerned about what could happen on her or his campus.
Interesting insight from a man who has studied many, many hate groups over the last several decades. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.